I have been privileged to travel the world. In my travels, I've seen the good and the bad that life has to offer. I've mingled with people from different cultures, backgrounds, and persuasions. Each place has marked me in different ways, and each experience has contributed to molding me into the person I am today. I have visited, worked, and lived in wonderful and enriching places. But my heart remains anchored in one in particular, Făgăraș. Făgăraș is a town in Romania, and it is the place where I was born and raised. That is where my parents are, where the never-conquered medieval fortress still towers over the Transylvanian town, where the hills and mountains of my childhood are as majestic as ever, and where the word home rings most true, where I feel most me. Because knowing where I come from, my origins, defines and grounds me. In the belly of the old fortress is the municipal library. That's where I became acquainted as a child with the novels of Jules Verne, Alexandre Dumas, Charles Dickens, Leo Tolstoy, Fyodor Dostoevsky. As I read their books, I was filled with wonder, a strong sense of justice, and the unquenchable desire to travel. Moreover, I began to ponder the big questions. Are the things we see and touch all that there is to reality? Why is there a universe? How did we get here? Why are we here? These questions have troubled the human mind for millennia. They are good questions, as they invite us to unravel the meaning and purpose of our existence. Religion sought to offer answers from the beginning of human thought. Science joined the quest, though often finding itself at odds with religion. It seems that today, science provides the dominant narrative, while religious ideas are often deemed archaic, retrograde, and obsolete. But are these two, religion and science, necessarily mutually exclusive? Is scientific inquiry truly impartial? Can science withstand the same scrutiny to which religious claims are subjected? And are scientific theories absolute with regard to our origins? In this episode and the next, we will engage the scientific paradigm from the perspective of two of skepticism's own tools, the Cartesian doubt and probability theory. Cartesian doubt is a systematic process of being skeptical about or doubting the truth of one's beliefs. This method of doubt was largely popularized in Western philosophy by René Descartes, who was a 17th century French philosopher and mathematician, and who sought to doubt the truth of all his beliefs in order to determine which beliefs he could be certain were true. Probability theory is a branch of mathematics concerned with the analysis of random phenomena. Applied to philosophy, this method of inquiry asks questions like, what if? Could it be? Is this possible? How probable is this? And it follows logical patterns to reasonable conclusions. These methods do not rest on absolutes. They rather seek to find objective truth. Therefore, in these presentations, we do not search for certainties, but rather consider plausible alternatives. Let us begin by exploring the mystery of our existence, cosmology. In the next episode, we will focus on the theory of evolution. Science speaks of the Big Bang and the singularity which started it all. In summary, there was the singularity, and then came dust and gas, which cooled down, molecules fused, small rocks became boulders, gravity attracted smaller boulders, and in time they became spherical. Heavy metals sank through the crust and formed the hot core. We are told that our solar system contained approximately 100 planets, but they were swallowed up by the remaining 4: Mars, Earth, Venus, and Mercury. The other 4 planets of our solar system are gas. Could we harmonize the Big Bang theory with the idea of a creator? Kenner Taslaman believes so. He writes, "From a work of Bach to a song of Celine Dion, from all the scores ever composed to the musical instruments, from computers to mobile phones, from Turkish lahmacun to Italian pizza, from lilacs to ants, everything existed potentially in the initial singularity." The crux of the matter here is that according to the Big Bang theory, the universe has a beginning. To Antony Flew, known at one time as the world's most notorious atheist, this fact opened the door to faith in God. When I first met the Big Bang theory as an atheist, it seemed to me the theory made a big difference, because it suggested that the universe had a beginning, and that the first sentence of Genesis, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth," was related to an event in the universe. If the universe had a beginning, it becomes entirely sensible, almost inevitable, to ask what produced this beginning. For Flew, the idea of something or someone who caused the beginning of all that exists was logical. Robert Spitzer shares the same view. He points out the following logical premises. 1. If there is a reasonable likelihood of a beginning of the universe, prior to which there was no physical reality whatsoever, and 2. If it is a priori true that from nothing only nothing comes, then it is reasonably likely that the universe came from something which is not physical reality. This is commonly referred to as a transcendent cause of the universe, physical reality, or a creator of the universe. Rodney Holder seems convinced too when he asserts that a non-temporal and non-physical first cause for the universe is ultimately unavoidable. There are supplementary theories to the Big Bang. One of them is the multiverse, or meta-universe theory, of which physicist Stephen Hawking was one of the proponents. Simply put, the theory hypothesizes that there is an infinite set of universes and that our universe has been birthed by a parent universe. We will come back to this. But first, let us pose another question. Why does the universe exist? Or why is there a universe at all? Richard Dawkins feels uncomfortable with the question, why? He actually calls it a silly question. He further argues that there is enough meaning and purpose in the here and now for us to live fulfilling lives, and that there should not be a need to understand the why of our existence. Well, this sounds a bit counterproductive for a scientist such as Dawkins, considering that questions are at the heart of scientific inquiry. popular science author Jim Holt seems to disagree with Dawkins and considers this to be the sublime, super-ultimate why question. He thus dares to ponder the cosmic mystery of existence. Why is there something rather than nothing at all? He begins his quest by citing philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer, who suggested that those who do not wonder about the answers to this question are mentally deficient. I agree with Holt that this position may be a bit radical, but it does imply how fundamental addressing this question is to our understanding of, well, everything. Holt further references philosopher Gottfried Leibniz, for whom the answer to the question of existence was not a great mystery at all. Leibniz, towards the end of the 17th century, held the belief in the act of creation, namely a creation ex nihilo. As Holt simply puts it, the equation is God plus nothing equals world. He then removes God and is left with blank plus nothing equals world. Holt reasons on and calls on physicist Lawrence Krauss, who in his book A Universe from Nothing proposes a new ex nihilo equation. The equation is quite complex, as Krauss's nothing is not the same as Leibniz's nothing. Krauss's equation, according to Holt, sounds something like this: a little nugget of false vacuum, which fluctuates into existence, plus miracle of inflation equals cosmos. Holt is not satisfied with this perspective and calls it a highly speculative, pseudo-religious point of view, where physical laws are seen as divine commands. He argues that the laws of quantum field theory do not have ontological powers, as physical laws are in the world and do not exist outside the world. He goes on to say that equations themselves cannot resolve the puzzle of existence. But then, somehow paradoxically, he suggests some kind of a metaphysical way out with the idea of a meta-universe where all scenarios are possible. Holt then speaks of random generic reality, where there's no further explanation for reality, for that which is, for that which exists. To him, our existence is a pointless reality in a vast universe which is mostly a wasteland with little pockets of charm and order, and where the inflationary scenario, which says that the universe expands, seems to make most sense. As for why do we exist, his proposition is equally disheartening. We won this cosmic lottery called life by mere luck, and we need to be resigned to mediocrity. We are not special at all, and in this big, absurd universe, we need to construct our own puny, transient, and ultimately inconsequential purpose. Holt dared to ask the question, the sublime, super-ultimate why question of our existence, as he called it, only to state, be it ever so eloquently, the apparent futility in offering a satisfactory and satisfying answer. And with his intellectual retreat into the realm of infinite possibilities, Holt renders both Leibniz and Krauss's scenarios equally plausible. Furthermore, Holt echoes Christopher Hitchens' idea that the universe is ugly and chaotic. Theoretical physicist Brian Greene does not agree, and he describes our universe as an elegant universe, where things are just right for life and mind to exist. This leads us to the next question. why is the universe fine-tuned for life and mind? Physicist Paul Davies says, "Scientists are slowly waking up to an inconvenient truth. The universe looks suspiciously like a fix. The issue concerns the very laws of nature themselves. For decades, physicists and cosmologists have been quietly collecting examples of all too convenient coincidences and special features in the underlying laws of the universe that seem to be necessary in order for life, and hence conscious beings, to exist. And then we have the multitude of serendipitous alignments which place our planet in the so-called Goldilocks zone, making life possible on the solitary yet marvelous planet, our home. For example, to quote Richard Dawkins, Earth's orbit around the Sun, which is technically an ellipse, is so close to circular that it never strays out of the Goldilocks zone. Moreover, the massive gravitational vacuum cleaner of Jupiter is well placed to intercept asteroids that might otherwise threaten us with lethal collision. Earth's single relatively large moon serves to stabilize our axis of rotation and helps to foster life in various other ways. Are these mere cosmic coincidences? Most scientists seem to be uncomfortable with this question, as it opens the door for speculative reasoning. In one of his thought-provoking interviews, which is part of the Closer to Truth series, Robert Lawrence Kuhn has an insightful and candid conversation with physicist Leonard Susskind, where they talk about why the universe is the way it is. Susskind agrees from the start that the laws of physics, the laws of cosmology, seem to be very special in a way that's unexpected, in a way that they are very, very conducive to our existence. He further refers to a number of factors, such as gravity and various constants of nature, which seem to indicate that the universe is indeed fine-tuned, and without which there would be no universe and no mind to inquire of it. Kuhn acknowledges that we need to deal with the reality of fine-tuning, while Susskind reluctantly uses the expression "whoever made the universe." He then speaks of the three possible alternatives in answering the question of who or what is responsible for the fine-tuning of our world. 1. God, which Kuhn asks Susskind to brush aside. 2. Accident, which Susskind calls an unlikely possibility. And 3. The megaverse. He argues that the universe is enormously big, and its diversity could be a reason for the belief in what he calls bubble universes, or multiverse, where there are different possibilities for some form of life to exist. Again, as with Holt, this seems to be a retreat into theoretical speculation, which seeks to reach out for sense and meaning far beyond our comprehension. It is worth noting that Susskind also speaks of a fourth possibility, namely that maybe one day someone is going to figure it out. When speaking on the fine-tuning dilemma, Susskind cites the cosmological constant and says that if it were to be changed only a tiniest bit, we wouldn't be here. Physicist Nima Arkani Hamed agrees with Susskind when he states that there is one single number, called the cosmological constant, which plays a crucial role in determining what the universe looks like. This number needs to have a precise value. If this value is off by a tiny bit, there would be no world to talk of. He goes on to talk about the wonder of where that number came from. He then entertains the following reflection. Wow, someone really cared to have put this parameter at just the right value so that we get to be here, and cares a lot. This is the sort of thing that really keeps you up at night. Maybe we, physics scientists, got the whole picture, the big picture, totally wrong. As a proponent of the multiverse theory, where chaos and random accidents created, so to speak, the conditions for us to form, to come into existence, he concludes, if you believe that someone out there cares and twiddles the parameters so that you can exist, that puts our existence at the very core of reality. In other words, we would really matter. Coming back to Susskind, when asked, are science and religion at war, he opens up to what motivates him to do science. I'm a person mainly driven by curiosity, he says. He then asserts that there are two things to consider in relation to religion. One, maybe God did make the universe. But then his curiosity leads him to query, number two, who made God? What is God made of? How many dimensions does God move around in? He considers this an impossible situation, with the God hypothesis raising more questions than giving answers, and therefore justified to be dismissed. I lose interest in questions that are so far beyond me that I'm quite certain that I can't answer, he quips. However, he remains open to the possibility that there may have been an intelligence involved in some way or another in the creation of the universe. He then concludes, I'm not an atheist. I'm not a religious believer either, nor an agnostic. I feel totally at a loss on what to make out of the existence of the universe. And maybe this is a reasonable place to be. We are limited in our understanding, and the retreat into uncertainty is somehow justified. But what if this limitation of our minds is part of the bigger picture that physics apparently fails to see? What if there is a veil, a curtain that covers the true reality and sets boundaries beyond which humanity cannot go? Spitzer gives the following explanation. So, what can science tell us? It can identify, aggregate, and synthesize evidence indicating the finitude of past time in the universe as we currently know it to be, and conceive it could be. Science can also identify the exceedingly high improbability of the random occurrences or conditions necessary to sustain life in the universe as we currently know it to be, and conceive it could be. Unlike philosophy and metaphysics, science cannot deductively prove a creation or God. This is because natural science deals with the physical universe and with the regularities which we call laws of nature, that are obeyed by the phenomena within that universe. But God is not an object, or phenomenon, or regularity within the physical universe. So science cannot say anything about God. Both Holt and Susskind confess to getting stuck on the question, why does the universe exist? So how do we deal with this question? And going full circle, how do we deal with the why in the why is there a universe question? Physicist Richard Feynman, in one of the most intriguing and captivating interviews he has given, is asked, why do magnets attract? In his answer, he surveys the larger question of why something happens, and then philosophizes on the apparent impossibility to adequately answer questions which begin with why. He ultimately proposes that you need to be in a framework to allow something to be true. In other words, you need to contextualize observable reality so that it does make room for plausible answers, and to be open to the possibility for truth. You need to pick an ideological side. Otherwise, you would be perpetually asking why. Therefore, when speaking of a fine-tuned universe, it is cognitively congruent and rational to adhere to the view that there is an intelligent and purposeful cause for our existence. What about the other plausible alternative to fine-tuning, the multiverse? Let us go back to Nima Arkani Hamed and his colleague, physicist David Kaplan, who, together with a large team of scientists, worked on what has been called the biggest and most expensive experiment in the history of humanity, namely the search for the Higgs particle at the Large Hadron Collider near Geneva. According to the scientists involved in this project, the experiment sought to reproduce the conditions right after the Big Bang, and thus address questions such as, why is the universe big? And why is gravity weaker than all the other forces? The Higgs particle was the missing link in the standard model of particle physics. Its property is to give particles mass, and it is the crucial piece responsible for holding matter together. Without the Higgs, life as we know it wouldn't exist, said Kaplan. Theoretical physicists proposed, and for decades, worked on two major theories where the Higgs is vital. Number one, supersymmetry, which looks for patterns and order in the universe, and which also meant that there are other particles which need to be discovered. And two, the chaos and meaninglessness of the multiverse, which would also mean that there are no more particles to be discovered and would thus mark the end of particle physics. Simply put, it was a question of two alternatives, order or chaos. For supersymmetry to be true, the mass of the Higgs would have had to be 115 GeV, giga-electron volts, while the theories which rely on the multiverse would need a much heavier particle, with a numerical value of 140 GeV. The Higgs boson was discovered in July 2012, and it has the numerical value of 125.35 GeV. This finding left particle physics in no man's land, with both theories in limbo and new ones needed, such as the unnaturalness of our universe, for example. What seems to be clear is that the multiverse is a theory in crisis. This is even more so considering that the Higgs is unstable and temporary. Flew was never convinced about the multiverse. He wrote, "I did not find the multiverse alternative very helpful. The postulation of multiple universes is a truly desperate alternative. If the existence of one universe requires an explanation, multiple universes require a much bigger explanation. The problem is increased by the factor of whatever the total number of universes is." It seems a little like the case of the schoolboy whose teacher doesn't believe his dog ate his homework. So he replaces the first version with a story that a pack of dogs, too many to count, ate his homework. So then, what is left if the multiverse theory is unviable? Susskind suggests that regarding our origins and the reason for our existence, cosmology presents us with two main competing and mutually exclusive theories: chaos or order, chance or design, multiverse or God. Particle physics rendered multiverse a flawed hypothesis. Implicitly, God remains competitive.